voice colleagues, even though my presentation is largely about choral music aimed at my choral colleagues. So we'll get to make fun of them in a little bit. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the future of voice science in choral music. So just a little presentation overview here. We'll start by looking at my research question, then I'll give you a little update on the state of the union of voice science in choral music, sort of where things stand. Then we'll briefly cover the research process and some of the results, and then I will suggest some solutions to improve things, and we'll get to take a look at some fun examples. Before I get started, I'll just talk a little bit about the terminology. Anytime I use vocology, voice science, science-informed vocal pedagogy, anything like that, I'm going to be referring to the use of modern accepted voice science in the theory and application of voice habilitation. So don't want to get too repetitive using one word over and over again. So let's get started. After taking vocology coursework, of course being shown the way, the truth, and the light, I started to notice some problematic instructions happening in the choral rehearsal, some of which are shown. So, you know, sometimes an instruction like throw the frisbee might be useful if it's contextualized with an explanation about breathing and onset, but too often idiosyncratic instructions like this are something that only the in-group of people in the choir understand, and they're not explained to new members of the choir, which leaves open a lot of opportunity for misinterpretation and misunderstanding. So other examples like open the vowel aren't necessarily incorrect, but they might need more context or specificity. So if the director says this, you know, we know that the E vowel is a very open throat, but is that really what they mean here? Probably not. So other examples just encourage outdated concepts altogether, like Bernard's idea of flooding the tone with air and aspirate onsets. So something like let a little air out of your nostrils before the onset. Dangerous little thing that has come up multiple times. So, you know, these ones are more insidious because they're betraying the conductor's lack of knowledge about voice science and just encourage poor phonation for students who don't know any better. So that leads to my research question. And although my initial study was focused on evaluating the physiological directives that are happening in choral methods books in particular, focused on areas of respiration and resonance, the lit review led to a much broader and I think more important question, which is how can choral conductors achieve a desired choral tone through physiological directives without a full and scientific understanding of the human voice? Without that, we're just guessing. We're making it up as we go along. So there's an obvious need for serious study and integration of voice science in choral pedagogy in particular. And so for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to talk about some of my findings, but then take things a step further and try to answer that broader question of how can we usher in a future of choral music based in scientifically informed vocal pedagogy. So I'll suggest a few solutions, and we'll look at a few examples to bring voice science to the forefront of choral methods with the shared goal of uniting choral conductors and voice teachers like yourselves behind a vision of the future where science-informed pedagogy is the basis of how we work to benefit our students. So, unfortunately, the state of the union is not strong. So here's the problem. Choral rehearsals are still largely based on the empirical model, one where teachers teach based on their own experience instead of the scientific model where they teach based on knowledge accumulated by many people, gathering evidence over time. And that's certainly a problem. This is a problem. Look back there. Just going to sleep. Anyways, so why does this matter? First of all, choral conductors are often the primary voice teachers for a majority of their students. This applies in all contexts: K-12 education, college, community choirs, church choirs. We are it. You guys don't necessarily teach every person that we see in front of us in the choral community. So we have a responsibility and an opportunity to employ science-based pedagogy that will help enable these students to enjoy a lifetime of expressive singing. Second, as choirs enter the modern world where we are increasingly performing an array of music from non-Western traditions, we can use voice science as a tool to enable a variety of timbres that bring this music to life in more authentic ways. Third, rehearsal time is precious. Choral people know this. We never have enough minutes to get out what we want to do. So efficiency is the goal. Every second that we save by using clear, consistent, science-based instruction is a second that we can put towards lifting music off the page in an effective and expressive way. And then lastly, if science-informed voice pedagogy becomes the bedrock for what you do as voice teachers, then we better get on board as choral conductors. Otherwise, we risk widening this divide, whether it's real or perceived, between voice teachers and choral conductors. So instead, we can use voice science as the glue that unites us. So, a little bit about the process and results here. In my research, I evaluated dozens of choral methods books and developed a recommended reading list as well as a not recommended reading list consisting of those books that contain reasonably scientific voice pedagogy. And in particular, like I said, I focused on evaluating specific physiological directives in the areas of respiration and resonance. So let's take kind of a broad look here at some of the state of things in voice in choral methods. I noticed two particular trends. One, we need high quality resources, and two, we need educational programs that actually use those resources for student conductors in particular. So let's take a look at some stats here. First, Deborah Spurgeon evaluated 7 common choral methods books back in 2004, and at that point she determined that approximately 10% of the content pertained to vocal pedagogy. And that's to say absolutely nothing of how scientific this content was, just that much of these books contain voice pedagogy at all. In contrast, today, based on my calculation in my study, I found that about 33% of these methods books that are most common today relate directly to voice pedagogy. So we see an improvement here for the last, almost 20 years. But let's not mistake 100% being the goal here. That's not necessarily what we're looking for. There's a lot more to choral music and to the rehearsal process than simply teaching people how to sing. So it's okay that some methods books contain other information. But I think that the goal is that a healthy proportion of these books be based in scientific voice pedagogy, and we're probably nearing that goal here. So we're making some progress. Next statistic, which is a little bit scarier. Sharon Hansen polled 61 American universities in 2014 and found that only 35%-ish of them required voice pedagogy even for one semester for their undergraduate vocal education majors. So again, this says nothing about the scientific content and quality included in these courses at that time, but only 35% of people like me, I graduated undergrad in 2014, had a voice pedagogy course at all. I'm one of those 35%. So my research included in this recommended reading list of choral methods books that contain scientific voice pedagogy, but we're not going to go through a whole lit review here, so I'd like to propose a solution and then look at some examples. So, to bring choral methods into this new scientific age, I propose a multi-pronged approach that involves what we know, how we apply it, and how and with whom we collaborate. So the first part, of course, is what we know, the know what. In this area, choral conductors and conducting students should certainly be on a steady diet of scientific resources, from books on pedagogy, like Boys, An Inside View, Your Voice, An Inside View, there we go. Then also quality oral methods books, like The Anatomy of Tone, that came out in 2017, and is an excellent book on my recommendation list. As well as numerous other publications that keep us up to date on the latest developments and application of voice science. So in addition, numerous professional organizations exist that provide opportunities for delving deeper into voice science, and they also look great on the CV, particularly for us choral people. But you voice people are certainly included to these resources, but we're not as familiar with some of these in the choral realm, and we're not often venturing outside of whatever voice pedagogy courses and resources are being published in like the ACA journal. And again, we see an increasing percentage of voice science included in our choral journal, but it's not necessarily the end-all be-all. We should be doing more. And then, of course, the most systemically difficult part of the problem here is the curriculum. So, 35% of vocal music education majors receiving any training whatsoever in voice pedagogy isn't good enough. We're not teaching music, we're teaching people. And these people are using their voices to bring music to life, so it seems pretty important that we know how these voices work and that we as choral conductors can help them to work more efficiently and expressively. So not only should 100% of vocal music education majors and conducting students at all levels, undergraduate, graduate, master's, doctorate, the whole thing, we should all be taking voice pedagogy coursework that's based in voice science. And then it's also going to take a good amount of collaboration with conductors, voice faculty at universities, administrators, people who are in charge, making the decisions in music departments in collegiate settings across the country to make this curriculum aspect a reality. And we'll see some interesting stats here, which just came out last year. NATS published a result of a survey on voice pedagogy instruction, and they found that 66% of respondents said that they had recently updated the syllabi and course materials for voice pedagogy courses, recently being within the last 2 years. And that for undergraduate and graduate courses, both anatomy and physiology here are the most common topics included in the curriculum. So this is great, this is progress. That's the good news. The bad news is that notice that choral pedagogy is way down here. Only one respondent in each category. So this is, if they have 2 courses, this is what the first course looks like, the most common topics. The second course, most common topics. We're way down here at the bottom, tied for last with other things like lesson planning and critical listening. So this is an issue. Now, as far as I'm aware, we need more research on the choral side of things to determine whether voice science and voice pedagogy is being included in choral methods coursework. So it kind of works both ways. We as choral people need to be coming into the voice world, and the voice world needs to be included in our curriculum as choral people. So that's an area for further research. So the second part of the solution is how we apply what we know. It's not enough to just understand the physiology of the voice if we're not using that knowledge to improve our instruction. So we can think about the when and the how to apply these concepts. So assuming that we go and we learn all of this and we're experts on scientific voice pedagogy, anatomy, physiology, all of these things, when and how do we apply these? First, we can think about what sort of vocal concepts might be necessary while we're in the very early stages of planning, like score study. We can prepare for issues by anticipating problems, and then that prevents us from having to think about solutions on the spot in front of a room of like 50 people who are all waiting to have you tell them what measure number and how to fix this timbre problem and how the diction should work and all these things. So the more we can do in the planning process, the easier our lives become on the podium. Then we can make room for things like voice and acoustic science in the logistical planning of the rehearsal and performance process. So for example, sopranos can use form tuning to emphasize the fundamental frequency by modifying vowels in the upper range. This is something that we do as choral people. We're not unfamiliar with this vocal concept. And according to at least one study, we see that when sopranos are using this kind of form tuning in the upper range, they're using a lower jaw, so the mouth is more open, and when they're in the upper range, they're using more mode 2 production, so this results in less internal sensory feedback, again, according to one study. So the sopranos might need more acoustic space around themselves to hear their own sound, to prevent pushing and over-singing, so we can plan for that in the logistics. How do we set up how our choir is standing? How much space do singers have in the room? Sopranos might need more than basses. This is something that comes from science that we can implement without our singers even knowing. So we can take account of this ahead of time. And the best part is that solutions like this don't require rehearsal time. Then there are opportunities throughout the rehearsal process, from the warm-up period through the rehearsal. And we can incorporate scientifically informed voice pedagogy in bite-sized, easy ways. So the most obvious place, of course, is to incorporate this during the warm-up process. And warm-ups should not be for mindless repetition of vocalises, like they so often are. So take the time, choral people, to design meaningful choral warm-ups. So emphasize concepts like breathing, tone, whatever you want to do, pick a couple concepts and make the warm-up purposeful, and then later you can tie that into the music. Brian Whitty says that the choral warm-up can be a significant component of the choral rehearsal that focuses on targeted vocal exercises connected to specific anatomic movement and coordination needed for phonation, oral awareness, and the development of musicianship skills. So, the more time you spend teaching meaningful warm-ups, teaching your choir how to sing effectively, this improves their technique, and then that pays dividends not only throughout the rehearsal, but throughout the whole school year. And then you have to connect these concepts in the rehearsal process to the music making itself. So, maybe the choir has a tricky entrance, everybody's in a really high tessitura. You can refer to what you talked about in warm-ups, things like onset and vowel modification, and then, that helps to bring them back to what you talked about in the warm-up, what that technique felt like in their bodies, and then they can incorporate that right there in the musical task at hand. So then the second part is, how do we do this? Of course, we need to use physiologically accurate instruction. This is the key to the solution here. So with that, let's jump into some fun examples. So these first few examples are going to be from the literature. These are taken directly out of choral methods books that are, as of this year, the most common, the most popular. So we see this particular instruction. During the following inhalation, let your jaw drop and your throat widen as if yawning. This will ensure that the air flows in noiselessly. So Sabine Horsman, the author here, is attempting to achieve a silent inhalation with this particular physiological directive. Drop the jaw, widen the throat as if yawning. So of course, the merits of silent inhalation have been well documented. So her impetus for wanting this is correct, but the way that she gets at the problem is problematic. So for example, you can drop your jaw and yawn and still have a noisy inhale. This doesn't solve the problem. So what causes noisy inhale? We need to think about the physiological happenings here. What causes it? The vocal folds are partially occluded or adducted. And we want the vocal folds either open for breathing or closed for singing. So this is something that, if the author had taken a minute to think about the physiology, this instruction suddenly becomes not very effective. So first, describing the widening of the throat as being akin to yawning is likely to cause several issues. It's likely to lower the position of the larynx. We know that this elongates the vocal tract and darkens the tone by increasing the prevalence of formant 1 in the sound. And then the sensation of yawning can cause the tongue to retroflex, and that depresses the larynx. And then, because there's a strong connection between the tongue and the larynx, this results in what voice pathology would call depressed larynx, which is a problem. And then all of this, impedes the free oscillation of the larynx, which can create a stereo tone, which is definitely not the result that you're going for when you want your choir to breathe silently. So we see all of these, knock-on effects that are potentially big problems from a seemingly innocent suggestion here. Richard Miller, so this book was 2009 that this instruction was suggested. Richard Miller, way back in 1986, said, in describing the yawn, we use language suggesting relaxation. We feel that the throat is widened, blah, blah, blah. Surely one must think that this position is the open throat. However, muscle tension must occur in the throat with the yawn posture. The yawn produces pharyngeal enlargement and laryngeal depression, and the same distortion is present when even a slight yawn is maintained in singing. There's the whole quote written out. So, way back in 1986, we already have this evidence from Richard Miller's excellent book, but 20 years later, in 2009, we still see instances of poor physiological instruction. So all of these potential outcomes that are more than just a silent inhale are obviously not intended as a result of a silent inhalation, but the connected nature of the systems of the voice means that a change in one place can affect other areas, often in detrimental ways. So if a choral conductor implements this advice, pursuing that silent inhalation, but doesn't understand all of these possible and likely physiological outcomes, then we're left with more problems than when we started. So this is kind of an example of the problem with instructions in the choral rehearsal. Let's look at example number 2. Lip position can darken and brighten the tone, and when the lips are protruded like a megaphone, they add ring, characteristic of higher overtones in the sound, and carrying power to the voice. This comes from the Cambridge Companion to Choral Music, which overall is an excellent resource, written in 2012. But we see a few issues with this particular instruction as well. The authors are, correct that lip position can alter the tone, and they specify that protruding the lips like a megaphone will add ring. But 2 issues. First, what do protruded lips look like? And 2, how did the conductor instruct the choir to achieve this? And then how are they defining ring? They add this parenthetical, characteristics of higher overtones in the sound. So that's what they're thinking about as ring. And if they mean that scientifically, then this instruction is just plain wrong. Because if the lips are protruded like an oo vowel, we can easily see from a spectrogram that the oo vowel erases higher overtones in the sound. So here's E, and here's oo down here. Very little high overtones happening. So what they're attempting to address is essentially the use of formants to adjust the vocal timbre here. We know that formant 1 resonates primarily in the pharynx, and that F1 dominant sound is often described as warmer, rounder, darker, while F2 resonates in the oral cavity, and that F2 dominant sound is primarily bright, brilliant, potentially brassy in nature. So protruding the lips, as you would in an oo vowel, elongates the vocal tract and contributes to formant 1, meaning that this instruction should typically result in a warmer and darker sound, which is probably not what they are going for when they say adds ring. So this illustrates the issue with a lack of specificity in the physiological directive at best, and a complete lack of scientific understanding on the author's part at worst. And this is a pretty common issue that I found throughout these choral methods books. Authors often neglect to describe the timbral outcome that they are trying to achieve as the result of a particular physiological instruction. So if a choral conductor takes this advice, something like this example, and then implements it in the instruction in the choral rehearsal, it's possible that they're not going to be pleased with the result because it's not what they expected to happen, and then they're just confused. And of course, every conductor, we have our own sound ideal, and we need to know the characteristics of the sound and how we can adjust the mechanism to achieve that sound, instead of just regurgitating advice from methods books that may not fit with what we're going for. All right, and our last example from the literature here, this is a good example from the Anatomy of Tone. This particular section written by Sean McArthur in 2017. So he's describing ways to achieve brighter timbre, and he reminds us that to make a sound brighter, all you have to do is raise the forming frequencies. So this can be done by spreading the lips, shortening the vocal tract, decreasing the size of the resonators, tension, or some combination of these things. So he goes on to describe these physiological adjustments by suggesting that instead of brighter or darker, he typically asks his singers to modify their vowels toward a more forward vowel, like E, for brighter sounds, and toward a more rounded vowel, potentially oo, for darker sounds. So this explanation is, scientifically accurate, and it's a really easy and applicable suggestion for choral conductors in the rehearsal setting. We can just switch our language from saying, hey, I want this to be brighter, to let's think about the vowel and adjust the vowel, and then the result happens, using a more physiologically, specific concept. So this is a really excellent example. We approve. This is the kind of adjustment that we need to make in the choral world. It's often really simple. So my findings, of course, build on what Andy Wilson researched a few years ago. And he found that there are a lot of wild instructions happening in the choral rehearsal. Some outright incorrect, some close to being useful, and others just humorous and idiosyncratic in nature. So take a look at some of these. I'm not here to tell you that you can't have fun with your ensemble. Some of these are certainly humorous, but it's important to note that easy to remember idiosyncratic phrases like Oreo wide or marshmallow knees need to be connected to physiological instruction and reinforced often. So let's take a look at some examples. These examples are from Andy Wilson's survey. The examples I'm about to show you are from my own experience, not here at this university. We're not targeting anyone. So this first one, basses. I need a soft palate festival. To evaluate how we can improve this instruction, we've got to look at two things. First, what does the director mean? Second, what result do they want in terms of the sound? So first, presumably when they say this, they want the basses to lift the soft palate, even though that's not what they're saying. And then what effect does this have on the mechanism and the resulting tone quality? So this particular example is problematic in many ways, primarily because it's ambiguous and it can also be misinterpreted. So the conductor might actually know exactly what they want in terms of the timbre and what will happen if the basses lift their soft palate. And if they know those things and they know the result they're getting, and this is their intended result, then this is great. Maybe they've given the basis a voice lesson in a sectional setting, and they've, established soft palate festival or something similar as a kind of cue word or cue phrase. In this scenario, that's awesome. This is useful. It's memorable, it's fun. Basses are going to know exactly what the conductor wants because they've already pinned it to a physiological concept. But on the other end of the spectrum, given the statistics that I referenced earlier, chances are good that the conductor doesn't know what they want here. So, we know that if we lift the soft palate, with those levator polati muscles, this is similar to how we would either yawn or sneeze. We already talked about yawning being problematic, darkening the tone, contributing to a depressed larynx, these kinds of concepts. But most people who say that they want to lift the soft palate are really looking for a brighter tone, not a darker tone, which can be achieved this way by lifting the soft palate in order to close the nasal port, which then makes the tone less dark, dusky, out of tune, these kinds of things. So, on the one hand, we have the possibility that we go towards the yawn reflex, and then if you go towards the sneezing reflex, that's the complete opposite problem. The larynx is shoved up and closed off, and nobody wants to sing like that. So, this concept of a raised soft palate needs to be taught physiologically with a clear timbral outcome, and then, you want to avoid inadvertently affecting all of the other vocal structures that you didn't intend to have an effect on with a directive like this. And then this is my personal favorite as a tenor. Tenors, y'all ought to be smoking helium. So, yeah. So, again, what does this mean, and what results are we looking for here? In the context of this rehearsal, so I was in this rehearsal, I heard this instruction. In this context, again, this was not here at Thornton. In this context, the conductor wanted the pitch to be on the high side, so thinking about intonation in the upper register for the tenors. So unfortunately, this could be easily misinterpreted to reference the sort of like small strangled timbre that you get if you suck in helium and then talk. So multiple interpretations here. This is problematic. But maybe the director, wants the tenors to include more mode 2 production. That CT dominant falsetto style. Maybe they're looking for that in this particular instance. So, why not say so, perhaps? This gives you the opportunity to talk about, what's mode 1 versus mode 2 production for tenors, and, where do we want to use it for different effects. You can combine this with vocal modeling, and then you can ask pretty directly for the type of sound that you want from your section, instead of being vague and comedic about it. And then on the other end of the interpretation spectrum here, maybe the tenors are just struggling with intonation because it's in the higher range. This is an opportunity to talk about vowel modification and form tuning and bring that into your rehearsal process. And it's these sort of direct, physiologically accurate instructions that are quick and efficient, but more easily understandable and transferable by our students.
Alex, I'm so sorry. We gotta
Yep.
bring it on home now. Come on, bring it on home.
Cool. So this brings me back to the last part of the suggested solution, which involves your voice people. So we want to create a voice teaching team for the benefit of our students. So most of this presentation is ultimately geared towards my colleagues in the choral realm, because we're not doing a good enough job educating ourselves about voice science and then implementing it in our rehearsals. We're also not traditionally great about reaching out to you guys and collaborating with you, having you come in and do warm-ups or a clinic of some sort, or a guest lecture on the anatomy and physiology of the voice. So from our end of the spectrum, there's just no excuse not to do this kind of stuff anymore. But then, even if we don't, if you have a job in higher education, or you're teaching private lessons and you have a local high school, please be the bearer of the good news and reach out and spread the gospel of scientific voice pedagogy. Offer to do warm-ups, offer to do this kind of clinic stuff. We should be working together as a team to improve the likelihood that our students can sing for a lifetime with healthy, expressive vocal technique. And we want to bring more of that to our students. So to wrap this all up, once we have these resources to better understand the science of the voice, and then apply that knowledge in a choral rehearsal in collaboration with you in a voice teaching team, then we're on the road to a world where choral rehearsals are more effective and efficient in achieving expressive singing in a variety of styles. Furthermore, like I said, we give these singers tools for a lifetime of healthy singing, and at the same time, we start to bridge this divide between voice teachers and choral conducting. So, all in all, I think that some of these concepts bring us closer to a future of voice science in the choral rehearsal. So, questions?
You've got 30 seconds. Go.
Yeah.
Shout once.
I have a question for you, Alex.
Yeah.
So in the literature on vocology, like the Scott Cook, for instance, a lot of it's tailored towards classical solo singing, which might have an undesirable aesthetic in choral singing. Have you found anything in your research that kind of tackles that? And what are your solutions to meshing those two?
Yeah, I don't think they're actually as far apart as we might believe. I think that we can incorporate classical solo style singing in effective ways, and choral conductors often want to modify certain elements. That's why I focus largely on like timbre and resonance, because that's what we do most often in choral rehearsals. So it's not that we can't take those kinds of classical techniques and implement them and perhaps modify them a little bit. Like these two worlds aren't really that far apart. But we often ask for things like no vibrato, and we want a brighter tone than maybe a solo singer might want to employ. So because we want these different changes that are modifying the classical solo technique, I think that's a perfect example of why we need voice science, so that we can do it in an effective and healthy way, so that those soloists who are in our choral rehearsal can manage both of those worlds at the same time.
Thank you all for being such a great audience, and if you have more questions, ask him.
Good job.
That could have been a 2-hour.
This question is exactly my paper.
Yeah. Well, and like Laura Lee is doing something similar. It's
Oh,
like
okay.
I just love that like all of our